This is episode 282 of the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. Welcome back to the show. Today I have Brandon Disher on the show. I've talked to him so many times, I thought we'd already met in person, but this was actually the first time. And we had another good chat today. He's been on REI Hot Seat in the past. Today we were talking about the economy, what's going on, what the future looks like in Canada. Brandon's PhD in physics, but he's a self-taught economics whiz. I'm labeling him as that. He didn't say that. But he knows his stuff. They're invested in student rentals. We talk about the path forward, ways you can hedge. And it was a really interesting conversation, as you would expect from somebody with those credentials. So Brandon's invested in London. He and his wife run their business together. And there's lots you can get out of this episode. So reminder that if you want to crunch some numbers, if you want to fine tune your skills on how deals work and making sure that your numbers actually pencil and are profitable, you can check out my cash flow analyzer spreadsheet on my website, www.andrew-hines.com. And without further ado, let's jump into the episode with Brandon. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. I've got Brandon Disher on. You were on REI Hot Seat a little while back, and we got you on for the big show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So we were trying to plan this for a while.
Yes.
And I went away to Florida, and finally I'm back. You're here. So I'm really looking forward to this chat because I had Daniel Foch on in December, and we got into the economic outlook. Obviously, you talk about this stuff all the time on your Instagram, and people should definitely be following you and soaking it all up.
Yeah.
But I just wanted you to come give us the goods. First off, we'll start you as an investor. Just give me the backstory. I know you're a PhD of something and real estate investor.
Yeah.
I'll let you narrate it.
Okay. Well, I quite frankly, I shouldn't have anything to do with real estate. I came to it by my relationship with my wife. When I was a little boy, my mom was a nurse, my dad was a social worker. These aren't like people that were business savvy in any way. My parents went bankrupt, and I think that impacted me a lot, quite frankly. So I decided that I wasn't going to do that, and I was going to be financially secure and independent. And for me, that meant an education. Yeah. So my initial plan was, well, I'm pretty good at baseball. I'm really good at baseball. I'm going to go to the States and get a full ride. That's what I was going to do. And I blew up my shoulder when I was 16. So that squashed that dream. But I was pretty smart, very hardworking. I've always been able to work hard. And I won a scholarship to go to university. I got a full ride at a physics program. And that was just my favorite, topic in high school. So I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I thought maybe I'd be like a crazy theoretical physicist or something, think about like the universe or the tiniest atoms in the whole, universe. But,
think about space-time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's that show, Big Bang Theory or whatever? There's a reason those stereotypes exist. Those people are real. Yeah. Like, I'm not like that. So once I figured that out, I was like, okay, I can't do that. So I did some co-op placements, and I bumped into this field called medical physics. And there's basically a whole segment of physicists out there that are using their brains to try to help beat cancer. Okay. And I thought that was a cool field. So yeah, so I just ate it. I said, okay, I'm going to do a decade of university, which is what I did. I finished my PhD. I did a clinical training program, and I bumped into my wife. Yeah. And their family's in real estate.
Where'd you meet your wife?
At Western.
Western?
Yeah.
We were talking about this off camera, but I went to King's with your wife. We discovered this.
Right.
Anyways, did you meet you at Western main campus?
Well, funny story.
At the bar?
Yeah. Quite frankly, it was my birthday. Basically, I was out with a buddy, and I saw 3 girls at the bar, and I knew one of them because she was in my anatomy class. And I walked over, and my wife was with her, and that's it. That was the end of the story, man. Yeah. So by chance, we just bumped into each other. I mean, this is why people go to Western, right? I think so for the most part.
Yeah, a lot of couples meet at Western.
That's right.
Very cool, man. Okay, yeah. So then real estate didn't happen until you basically got married, or
it's funny. Like, what happened was, I was very focused. Like, a PhD is an intense process. Okay, like the concept is you're doing something novel, meaning brand new, never been done before. It has to stand up against, as you know, you had an experience in academia, right? Mm-hmm. It has to stand up to peer review. Okay. Yeah. So it's like running a gauntlet. It really is. It's pretty intense. And I was very focused on finishing that because I'm driven that way. Right? Yeah. So I got to see what my family or her family was doing. And then I saw what I was doing. And that was the first time where I saw the contrast in experience. And I thought, yeah, I'm working at a bar to try to pay my way. Yeah. I do have scholarships, thankfully. Like, I graduated with no debt. Okay. That's was great. Like, I was really proud of myself. I worked my ass off with like side jobs, scholarships, et cetera, to get this thing done. Right. But I was working 68 hours a week. Like, I was working that much, and I love to work. So that's okay. Yeah. But I saw her family, and I'm like, I just kind of looked at it and I said, well, if you have an investment property, it's paying you cash flow, provided if you've bought correctly, right? You're not over levered. Every month, the tenant is paying down your mortgage. Yeah. Right? If you're lucky, you get some appreciation, and then you can lever against it. Like, you can just create money out of thin air. Yeah. Because there's a building that the bank says, okay, this is a safe asset. We're happy to give you money against it. Like, I've probably spent like $250,000 in my brain when I think about it. And, maybe the bank does say, okay, here's money to buy a mortgage or something for a personal residence, but I can't lever my brain, right? Yeah. I can't do that like you can with a building. So I just had this like epiphany moment where these people aren't working anywhere near as hard as I am. Yeah. I had those moments. And they're just doing so much better. And like, I'm not going to get into their lifestyle, but it was better than mine. Yeah. Like, I was living in a shitbox apartment. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I can swear.
You can swear.
Okay. Yeah. So, and my wife she can test, like, she saw it. Yeah. But anyway, so I was driving like a 20-year-old Honda Civic with holes in it. And I just didn't really care. I was just having a great time. Like, I was having fun thinking, and I'm a big thinker. I was making great friends. I was having good experiences. Yeah. And I just figured the finance stuff, as long as I got the degree, I know I'd get the career, and then I'd be fine. Yeah. And then something else happened. So my wife and I, we got married. We had a kid. And there was no jobs in Ontario at the time. Very different market today, by the way. We went out west for 5 years. And this was when... And then this is when I got angry, quite frankly. I had given myself like a good chunk of my life, from 20 to 30 to this process. And I was finally making the real salary. Okay. Yeah. And I just realized, if my wife wanted to stay at home, if we wanted to have children, if we wanted to give my children access to her on a regular basis, that what I was doing alone wasn't going to cut it. And that really made me angry. And on top of that, my first employer, I like distinctly have this memory where I'm sitting in my office. It was like probably the first year of work. And someone comes down the hall and say, hey, Brandon, you got to come to this meeting. And I said, meeting for what? And they said, it's a cola meeting. And I was like, Coca-Cola or whatever? And because I had no idea. I just started working. And no, the cost of living adjustment. I said, oh, okay. So I walk into this meeting and they tell me that, we haven't had a pay increase for 5 years. For 5 years. And I thought, wow, wait a minute, I just worked my ass off for a decade and like these guys aren't going to give me a pay increase? Yeah. Like, okay. So then I go back to my office and I just pull up the spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, and this is where I actually feel like probably the stupidest moment in my life. I'm not even joking. Like, I felt like an idiot. Yeah. Because as soon as I put the numbers on the spreadsheet, you take your salary, okay? You take a reasonable inflation number, and today we have a very different type of inflation. But back in 2015, you take your salary. You watch what would happen if you just increase it at 2% a year, which was common back then, right? And you project it out 20, 30 years. In one column, you take another column, and you just fix it. You don't change it. You take the difference of those two numbers, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And that's when I was just like, what the F? Like, this is not cool, right? So then immediately I was like, okay, well, I better start investing. And I thought, well, I'll do this in the stock market. I'll make up the difference and I'm sure I'll catch up. It's not, I bet I could do better than my wife's family on my own. Okay. And then you do some reading and you quickly learn that if you're investing in the stock market, it's pretty damn hard to like just pick a random stock.
To beat the index.
Oh,
even.
dude, it's impossible. There are hedge funds. There are teams of people who are smarter than me.
They can't beat the
with
the
50
index.
PhDs, and even they can't beat the S&P 500 necessarily. Okay. The beauty of real estate is that if you do it well, you get the income, you get the depreciation, you get that's the tax part. You get the equity paid down, and you get the leverage. If you do it right, you can actually get double-digit returns.
Yep.
And if you want to build wealth quickly, that's what it takes. It takes either like a super high savings rate. I'm talking like 50% of my income invested in the S&P to get to that point where you're financially independent, or it takes like a 20-30% return if you want to be somewhat financially independent with like a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. And it used to be very, very doable. Even a couple of years ago, you could pencil deals all day long that would return 30%.
It's a lot harder today.
Yeah. Now I crunch these numbers in my spreadsheet. I'm seeing 10, 11%. That's kind of where we're at, and with no cash flow.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well,
and that's assuming even just a stagnant market, a 1% appreciation. Never mind if prices go down, then your return is gone.
Well, yeah. And I mean, how are you doing that? Are you calculating it in real terms or are you calculating it in nominal?
Nominal. Yeah.
So the London market now peaked in February 2022. It's definitely down 20-25% in nominal terms. Like I think the average price of the house in February 2022 was roughly 850. Now we're just above 600. So it was like a 250K differential there.
Yeah, I got hammered on one of mine that I sold there.
That's nominal.
Yeah.
You've got to attack inflation because we've had between 3 to 8% inflation.
Yeah, you're saying so the loss is even more.
Oh,
when
it's
you
over
factor-
30%.
Yeah, that's absolutely
Right?
true. It makes a big difference.
Just on the appreciation part. I mean, you still paid down your mortgage at the time. You still had cash flow potentially that would offset the loss. But anyway, that's called investing. That's a part of it. So,
but to the point you're saying, you got to get those 30% returns
if you want to like not die poor.
Yeah, and now like the scenario is like you got to overcompensate for what's happening right now if you really, to your point, don't want to die poor.
So funny story. Literally just before we came here, I'm going to tell you this. We hit up a Fortino's, whatever, up the street, just to get like a beverage, and this lady is like stealing groceries, and like they're trying to tackle her on the floor, and I'm thinking, and this lady's wearing like scrubs. She looked like a nurse or a PSW or something, and you just know that, like what I just described to you. Okay, I put together when I was 31. I'm in my 4th decade of life now. It wasn't that bad then. Now with the level of inflation we have, the bottom half of the population is going to be squeezed substantially. And personally, I feel like a lot of the crime we're seeing in the papers, like particularly in this GTA area with car theft, et cetera, it's all part of this effect. It's this concept that if you read about, there's a great book and it's a seminal book. Everyone should read it. It's so big and gross, but you should read it. It's called Capital in the 21st Century. It's written by Thomas Piketty.
Okay.
He's a French economist. What he describes, and this was my moment of frustration. If you take a country, okay, and you have people that own assets, those, and we call that capital. It could be stock market, could be real estate, could be private ownership in a company, okay. What happens typically is that that capital will appreciate. Let's say it's 6% a year. Then you have the other half, or let's say the other 90% of the country. That's the labor. Okay, their wages are tied effectively to GDP, right? Yeah. Like gross domestic product in the country. What has happened with GDP in the Western world in the last 20 years? What's it been?
More or less, it's gone up a little bit, but not much.
We're like 1 or 2% a year,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's somewhat stagnant, which is also indicative of the wages that labor has commanded over that time period. What has happened to capital? What's happened to real estate in Canada in the last?
Well, it went up like crazy. So it was driving GDP is pretty much.
Well, my point. My point is that the capital in this particular, unfortunately, real estate in this example, it's been financialized. It's no longer a place to live, right?
Yeah.
It's a wealth-generating machine. And Canada either owned it and you got wealthy, or you didn't and you got really poor.
Yeah, that's true.
So that moment of crisis in my office, I put it together.
Yeah.
And I said, holy cow. Like, if I don't get some assets together now, and this is before the inflationary impulse that hit us in 2020.
Yeah.
If I don't get this together, this means my wife, this means my children. Like, this is my why, or whatever, what do you guys talk about? My kids are screwed. Like, even if I could give them my brain, okay, that I've cultivated over the last 2 decades, let's say, it doesn't matter. Okay, this is why I'm saying to you, I shouldn't be in real estate. Like, I like physics. I like helping people. Okay, like, I actually take a lot of pride and joy in my job. Like, I like helping people with cancer. I feel like that's an altruistic pursuit. But I have to invest in real estate if I'm going to survive. And, it turns out I really like finance. I really like economics. If you look at my Instagram, you know that. I'm obsessed with that stuff. And I like business. So maybe I could have been an investment banker or something. Maybe that's what I should have done. But anyway.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my spill. So I look at me like I'm a function or byproduct of our environment in Canada for the last 20 years. I tried to do something productive for society. I'm still doing it. But I'm not stupid enough to know that if I don't jump on this wealth machine, I'm screwed.
Yeah, you gotta.
Yeah. So that's.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had, obviously, you mentioned your wife's side, they were already in real estate.
Yep.
When did you guys get married?
Oh, when was that? 2013? 2014. Yeah. I should probably know that.
So, how has that come into play here, the real estate in that family?
Well, so I'm in my office and I've had this epiphany, and we have a family member who owned real estate in London, and he was getting tired of it and he didn't want to do it anymore. And I put this together and I just called him. I said, listen, we have to buy this. Like you're starting to sell, cut that out. Guys like Andrew Hines are going to come and eat your portfolio. And you started, right? Like, you guys, you were swimming around. You could smell the blood in the water, and you and a mutual friend of ours now, actually, who's also very smart, astute fellow. You guys were nipping at the edges, and you know what? Good for you. Like, you saw the situation, and you came in and you took advantage of it. You did what any, capitalist should do. Like, that's all good, man. And I'm happy you guys made a profit on what you bought. That's great. But I just said to him, like, this is it. Like, this is it for my children. You have to let me buy this. And he said, okay. So that's what we did. Yeah.
Now, as far as the down payments and all that go, how are you able to work that out? Did you have that all saved?
So we did, no, we didn't have it saved. I mean, we obviously, we levered the equity in the company to pay this gentleman. That's what we did. And we did a good portion of it in 2017. And my big claim to fame is we did most of it, a good chunk of it, or at least refinanced it, and at the depths of the low interest rates in 2020, 2021. And this was where...
Yeah, you got into the 10-year rates, you were saying?
Dude, we talked.
Yeah.
I told you I was going to do that.
Yeah, well, we were both, and I was getting into stuff back then, and I saw people taking variable rates. I'm like, what are you thinking right now? How is variable going to go lower than what you're getting in these fixed rates?
Unless mortgages go into a negative interest rate. And then in that situation, they're going to pay an investor to hold a mortgage?
No.
They're going to pay a homeowner to live there?
So, yeah.
Like in Denmark, they were playing with that at the time, and I remember thinking, well, what this situation is like in Europe, they had a bond market with negative yields. And you ask yourself, why would anyone buy a negative yielding asset, right? Well, it's because it's the same thing as buying real estate in Canada in 2020. There's a final bag. They think the interest rate is going to keep falling, so the value, like bond market price, is inverse proportional to the yield. So they just keep the yields going down, so it's going to appreciate.
Yeah.
So But to me, that never made sense. So, and I was pretty sure, like studying the economics, that we would get inflation and higher interest rates, and that would be a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah. I was saying that a bunch back then. I was saying it, and in my heart, I had never seen it in my lifetime, but I just like, how could this not end in brutal inflation and brutal interest rate hikes?
Well, it may,
I was calling that from 2020, like the day of the lockdowns. I'm like, you can't do this.
So all right, well, I have this idea. So I think the difference between, say, the 2008 moment in the U.S., where they took out trillions and billions of debt to shore up the financial market, and the difference between the pandemic in 2020, also trillions of debt was pumped into the economy. The difference is who gets the money. Okay, so I believe we're at the end of this long-term debt cycle. And in 2008, that money...
Sorry, you want to just flick that? Just flick this. Yeah, perfect. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In 2008, that money went into the commercial banking system. It was put in there to shore up Bear Stearns and the Lehman Brothers, and
it didn't make it into the average consumer's pocket.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the banks didn't lend it; they kept it back.
They kept it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it didn't inflate like grocery prices and all that. Whereas this one actually went into the pockets of the people buying
all you have
groceries.
to do, you just apply. Can I get a CERB benefit? I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
I knew people that were not unemployed.
Yeah.
That applied for it and got it anyway. And I'm thinking to myself, this is insane. We are going to have a massive inflationary impulse for this. And unfortunately, and I know we're going through disinflation right now, and we probably should, and will get interest rate cuts soon. But in my view, for this next decade, inflation is going to be a big thing that we're all going to have to learn to deal with going forward.
It's just going to keep hurting the lower class. The middle class will be hurt by it too, and then the asset holders will continue to be okay. I mean, I think real estate's mostly going to be stagnant, if not go down in value. I mean, look at Japan, like 35 years straight of real estate values depreciating.
I mean, it's a bit of I agree with you. If you look at like private debt or household debt to GDP, Japan is a very similar situation to like back in the 80s. Very similar situation where Canada is right now. Like our household debt to GDP is over 100%. The last time we spoke, I said in Ontario, it's over 200. In BC, it's over 200. There's too much debt on the household balance sheet. We cannot have higher interest rates and expect, continuation of the appreciation that we were enjoying from 2022. So,
that was the wild card. Like everybody's uncle had a pre-construction condo, made $300,000. Everybody was singing a song.
Yeah.
My meetups were getting 100 people out because they all knew Uncle Joe got rich in real estate.
How's it going now?
Oh my God, they just disappeared.
It's close now. Yeah.
Like the podcast listenership is down. The meetups like just evaporated. I mean, the interest, it's not sexy. I've been saying this. It's so frustrating to watch because I don't think the content's ever been better on the pod.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like just the interest is just not there because even the ones who were in it got burned. A lot of them did. And I think that listening to a real estate podcast is kind of a painful thing to them now. So a lot that got burned, they don't want to be reminded of the getting burned. So I think that those are all contributing. I mean, we still have a listener base, and I'm grateful for the people who listen every week and thank you and watch and all that.
Yeah.
And
by the way, I enjoy your podcast. I try to listen to it as much as I can. I've learned a lot from you and your guests, and I think you've brought a tremendous amount of value to the whole investor community. So thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're on here so you can give some value.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about, knowing the market is where it is. Like we know you look at a deal you're going to buy on the market, factor in the interest rates, factor in the rents you can get today, and you're seeing, you're seeing like your 10% return, stuff like that. Are you seeing ways to engineer deals that do better?
I'll give you the experience that I had. In 2020, we did buy one property in Windsor, and like you, I felt that it was outside of our wheelhouse. It was a single family home, and we sold it in 2022 just to get rid of that because that didn't want it. Like at that point too, I felt like we couldn't cash flow in London very easily, so we decided we'd try something different.
Yeah.
Nah, I didn't like that. We got out of there.
Yeah, the whole Windsor thing, I had so many opportunities.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is just too far.
Yeah. So for us, like, we're just going to stay in our wheelhouse. We're going to stay in London. We like it there. But I think this is going to sound odd. The way that we are adding value and becoming more profitable is we are focusing on the portfolio that exists today, and we are trying to drive rents. And we're adding bedrooms, for example, or we're improving units. And like, we have seen pretty good lifts in our rents doing that. Now, the rents themselves,
They went up on their own so much. Yeah.
So
Cashed in.
in 2020, we were looking at like, I don't know, 600 a bed, maybe 700 a bed. You know, now it's between, depending where the building is, obviously. If you're south of Warncliffe and Oxford, you know that area. You know, 800 to 1,000, depending on, maybe even 1,250 if you have something with ensuite bathrooms, like the stuff that you used to build.
Yeah, so this would be $1,250 now? Good Lord.
Well, maybe, but probably 1,000.
Yeah.
But I don't know, should I tell you?
Yeah, the one on Sunset. I know Carlo got $1,250 after I sold it.
I think it's 1,500, man.
You think it's $1,500
I think it's 1,500 now. Yeah, pretty easy. 1,500. Yeah.
$1,500 a bed times 6.
$9,000.
Good Lord. That thing would have been cash flowing at my old mortgage, like $5,000 at that.
Yeah.
$5,000-6,000 a month.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
Damn.
What I wanted you to do, what I called you when I was sleeping was you could have got like 2% for 10 years. Like this is, okay. So here's the mindset that I think, this isn't pivotal actually. I think this is important. So the whole environment that we've enjoyed in Canada since the 1980s has been premised off a falling interest rate environment, right? If you look at late 1980s, we had, 15%, 20% interest
It's been
rates.
falling ever since.
It's been falling in a cyclical pattern ever since. It's a sine wave. It's a squiggly, right? And it goes down. So every single successive business cycle, the prior highs and lows are higher than the next business cycle where they're lower, right? We hit 0 in 2022.
Yeah, there's no going lower than that.
And then if you look at the trend now, we broke out of that channel down and now we're going up. In my view, it's a paradigm shift. The way we should be structuring our debt, getting a variable short-term product worked extremely well. Every time you renewed your mortgage, it was at a cheaper rate.
Yeah.
The building appreciated because the interest rates were lower.
Yeah.
And it was just a cash flow appreciation monster. Now, I think interest rates are now in a secular up channel to an extent. We'll cap those at some point.
Yeah.
So what people should be thinking about, part of their paradigm shift, is like if they have debt, and I mean any debt is going to be a great tool in the future. If you have a business, whether it's an HVAC company, a plumbing company, or real estate, if you have the opportunity to get a negative real rate, right? So you have the interest rate on your mortgage, less inflation.
Yeah.
If that's negative, that is where you're going to become wealthy.
That's it.
Okay? Because what you're doing in this situation is you're screwing over the bank.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it in.
So you're just saying because inflation realistically is, where do you realistically
it's
think
going to land
inflation is?
between 3 to 6% for the decade.
So let's just say hypothetically, interest rates were 5% right now and inflation was 6%. You're saying that's where you're winning.
That's a great.
Yeah.
That's a great. That's a -1. So what you're doing, Andrew, is you're borrowing a nominal amount of money, and in real terms, you're paying back less.
But in that same time frame, the asset you have it secured against is most likely going down because people can't afford to pay for it. Unless, of course, the immigration effect offsets that, which I know you post stuff on this too. That's nothing guaranteed. The immigration factor here is not guaranteed.
Well, okay, so I just want to finish this thought.
Yeah,
so
finish it.
I want investors, I want regular homeowners. Like, we should be so envious of citizens of the United States of America because there they have the 30-year term. There is a whole country of homeowners down there that locked in 3% interest rates
They just got
30
them.
years.
Yeah.
They're never going to have to change their payment.
Yeah.
And they are going to have worse inflation than us going forward. And that is just going to separate, it's going to drive that wealth gap even wider. Because, you know, now that interest rates are 7, 8%, good luck buying a house.
Yeah.
Right? And the boomers aren't going to sell them. Why would you sell your house?
Yeah.
When you've got 3%?
Not unless you're in distress. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they're not. The economy's ripping. So,
yeah. That's why I like those subject views. I don't know if you heard about those.
yeah. So if you have the opportunity, like we're still in somewhat of a business cycle here. Like in Canada, we're going to get lower interest rates in the next 24 months. If you have the opportunity to try to, and I hate saying this, timing the bottom of the rate cycle, grab some long-term debt because there's a better chance of interest rates floating higher over the next decade or two than lower for sure. Just based off the trend, based on the fact that inflation is here. And how do I know this? Okay, so this is how I think about interest rates. If you take, so first of all, our fixed mortgage market is completely dependent on the bond market, right? The Canadian bond market. And what's that depend on? The American bond market.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything is dictated by the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now, we have a situation where even though the U.S. is ripping, you know, Biden and the whole government cohort, they are running 6% deficits. They're running like recession-style deficits, 6 to 8%. You cannot have an economy fail in that environment. Like, not really, right? They are pouring trillions of dollars into like their Inflation Reduction Act and their Chips and Science Act. They are trying to retool the industrial base of the United States of America right now. That is the goal. So the idea that they're going to have low interest rates is gone. And the reason why that is, so how do you set the yield on a 10-year bond or a treasury? What is the nominal GDP at inflation? So if GDP nominally is 3, inflation is 3, if I'm going to buy a bond as a sovereign pension fund, I want 6. I want 6%.
Yeah.
I'm not. Why would I? Yeah. I'm not going to be the guy that's getting screwed by inflation because if I'm lending out my money, I want a real return.
Real return, yeah.
So if the 10-year in the States is 5 or 6, well, hell, Canadians got to do it too. Even though we have so much debt, that would totally wipe out Canadian real estate because we can't take 5% interest rates in Canada. Just can't. Not in Ontario, not in BC.
But we are. But you could see the effect. It's stagnating the real estate market.
Well, okay, so go long term. Get the lowest interest rate you can, get a real negative rate. That's my best advice that I can give people going over the next decade. As far as capital appreciation in Canada goes, sometimes I get stressed on Instagram because I'm bearish. I mean, but that's just how I see it. I'm just being honest with everyone. This is how I see it. And people will just send me DMs like, you're an idiot. We got all these millions of people coming in here, you know, real estate to the moon, man. I'm like, well, not really, because...
Well, they just restricted it, right? So you're going to have a fall off in... Well,
but let's just look what happened last years from 2020 to 2024. Or sorry, 2022 to 2024. If you go and look at immigration, we brought in 1 million people in 2022 to 2023. We brought in 1.3 million in 2022 to 2024. That's 4% of the population. Like if we're talking 40 million people, that's 4% of the population in 1 year. So if your theory that dumping people on top of real estate causes appreciation, well, what did we see in the last 2 years? Precipitous decline.
Yeah, it couldn't even keep up at that rate.
No.
But now they've capped it.
So we'll talk about that. That is actually something new.
Yeah.
And that is bad. But my point is, what really matters is the cost of financing. If you take an average couple in London, Ontario, and they're making $100,000 a year, right? In Canada, you know, if you want to get a mortgage, you've got to get past a stretch test. So if interest rates now, right today, are around 5, let's say, I don't know, maybe it's lower, you know, you have to pass a 7% interest rate test. So how big is your mortgage? It's $400,000. That's roughly, like these are round numbers. So if the average price of a home in London is $600,000, you've got to come up with $200,000.
Yeah.
And you've just gone through an inflationary spike. So are your savings there?
No.
You know, like who has the funds?
No, it's a nonsense picture. Hence, we go back to why the enthusiasm for the podcast isn't as much, right?
But I've been saying this for a while, and like if you go back to some of my like favorite stories, like 2022, 2023, like I've been trying to get this out there so people wouldn't get hurt. But Anyway, so that was while we brought in over 2 million people. There's 2.6 million non-permanent residents in Canada as of January 2024.
And what's your take? Are they going to be leaving?
Well,
or are they going to convert into permanent residents?
Okay, so all right, so let's get into that. Yeah, so this is the next phase. Okay, so this is
if they leave, that's bad. Well, bad for real estate prices. If you're a current owner that bought in at the high and you don't want to be underwater, caveat to
if
that.
you bought any time between 2021 and 2022, you were underwater unless you put 40% down. And I'm sorry, I need to retract my statement. This is a national podcast. I'm very Ontario-centric.
You're talking
Southwest Ontario.
London-minded, yeah.
Right? I'm sorry. So let me just, I don't know, I don't want to scare you, buddy. I have realtors that reach out to me on Instagram. I know a guy in Saskatchewan. He was showing me their listing data. It is a bull market. They have their average price out there is $300K a house.
Yeah.
So
things are looking up in Saskatchewan.
Looking good.
I hear great things about Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I got buddies in Calgary. They're getting bidding wars. They're priced out. They've actually had. That's the one market in Canada that's done extremely well through all this because they're benefiting from higher immigration. Yes, people leaving Ontario, and the affordability levels are much better. So at 4% interest rates, it doesn't really matter. It's not impactful. But so okay, let's get back on the immigration story. Impacts of this. So as of the last couple of months, the Minister of Immigration said, okay, January 2024, we had a roughly 6.5% of our population were non-permanent residents. So that is foreign temporary workers, that's international students, asylum seekers. We're going to bring that down from 6.5% of the population to 5% starting January 2025. So 5% of 40 million is 2 million. So if you do the differential, that's 2.6 minus 2, that's 600,000 people extra.
Yeah.
So how are they going to do this?
They're going to convert them into permanent residents.
Right. It's they could put them on the boat and say, hey, thanks for making the trip, getting your education, now you're out of here. That's not nice.
They're not going to do that likely because it'll be make them way more upset. What they're more likely to do, and you pointed this out on one of your stories, is they're just not going to take other immigrants. They're just going to, these are our immigrants for this year.
So we have two cohorts of immigrants. We have non-permanent residents and then we have permanent residents. And the permanent cap is $500,000. 500,000.
So they're going to eat up that cap.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're going to take the excess 600 for the next 3 years. They're going to take 200. So for 25, 26, 27, and they're going to take of the 500 permanent resident cap, they're going to convert NPR to PR, which means on net, we should have 300,000 extra individuals coming to the country every year for the next 3 years. So we're going from something like
millions
to 4% of the population down
nil,
less than 1% of the population.
Yeah.
So economically, what type of impact will that have? Well, it'll be a tremendous impact.
Well, imagine GDP, because GDP can't even grow with 1 million coming in. A million people coming in.
It has grown.
A little bit.
It has.
Not major growth.
We haven't been in a technical recession with 2 quarters of negative.
But that's because the immigration hit it.
Right. So that's right.
What was that? 1%, 2%? That we're in that range, right?
That ballpark. And, and that's honestly, that was done.
And that's nominal, right? Not real.
That's nominal. That's not real.
Yeah. So it's already.
I have to check that. But
we're in the ballpark. Okay.
We're in the ballpark. Yeah.
And if you really factor true inflation without substitution, we're definitely negative GDP growth.
Yeah. And what's prompted the political change is the National Bank came out with a paper calling the current situation a population trap, where there are far too many people in the country now for the public service to support. So that's education, healthcare, et cetera. We've overwhelmed our capacity. So now we have a productivity trap where we just we're not productive. We're so GDP per capita
has gone into the tank.
We've had, negative rates of that for 6 sequential quarters. We're going to have a 7th now. So that is driving this political change. So,
which means every Canadian is getting less wealthy. Each one is producing less wealth for the country.
That's right. Yeah. So
as they bring in more.
This is why the lady's stealing groceries at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Right? That's the state of affairs.
It is such an ugly picture when you think about it. Like you said, the asset holders can still get really wealthy. There's ways you can tool. There's ways you can still be successful here. But for the average Canadian that's not educated, it's not a positive outlook.
No. And even for the investor class, the days of rampant appreciation speculation are done. You need to be more sophisticated. You have to be able to tear a building apart, like a 100-year-old Victorian property, and turn it into a quad.
Yeah, you got to be able to do forced appreciation.
Yes.
The forced appreciation still works, but then you also have to be ready to watch that building decline in value over time.
Potentially.
I don't know. Like, there are some people who feel, and I know you've said this too, that you think multifamily will stay or increase, and then the single families will decline. Is that how you feel?
So, okay. So for the next 3 years, we've basically pulled all of the immigration forward into 2 years, right? So we've soaked up all the excess GDP help that we could have had. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have, I don't know if we'll have negative GDP. Definitely could. But we're going to have less GDP, let's say sub 1. We're going to get higher unemployment. We're still going to have reasonably higher interest rates compared to the pandemic period or the pre-pandemic period because our neighbors of the South are crushing it.
Yeah, and they won't just reduce it here. Otherwise,
they could.
Otherwise, our exchange rate goes completely out of whack.
Exactly,
which drives inflation anyway.
Yes,
because if we're paying more for U.S. goods, it's going to drive the price of everything up and doesn't help us.
So it's between a rock and a hard place, basically. So we're going to have a recession. We will have interest rate cuts, but when you offset that by higher unemployment, less demand because the immigrants there's less people coming. Mm-hmm. And then the other factor is the federal government is going to add apartment building supply. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at the data from CMHC recently, they suggested that single family town and row houses are all new starts are gone, like through the floor.
Oh yeah. But laying off workers like crazy.
There's no, but the apartment building, that segment's booming.
They're still building apartments.
They built like 95,000 units. Mm-hmm. They've offset the losses in the other segments of the housing sector. So
you're saying the federal government is building them?
No, they've incentivized the private sector. Yeah. Okay. So they've taken away the GST to build a purpose-built rental.
Yeah, I figured that was going to be a big impact.
Capital costs have gone. They're allowed to write off 10% now, where before it was 4%. You can get those cheap loans, MMLI Select.
MLI Select.
Whatever the letters are.
Yeah.
90%.
Yeah, so they've done a ton to produce more of those.
So they've incentivized that, and it's making an impact. They're building. Mm. So there's going to be more rental supply. So I actually expect the 8% insane rental inflation that we were having, I thought that would persist. But because they're going to decrease this immigration number, and which is totally new in the last couple of months, and because they have built these apartment buildings and they're going to continue, I actually expect we'll see rental inflation maybe 2%, 3%, something kind of normal.
Yeah.
So it's bearish. It's bearish for single family homes for the next 2 years, maybe 3 years, I think. Could end up being like this lost decade scenario that your buddy there, Daniel Foch, talks about. I think he's right. It's a lot of similarity to the 80s, 90s period. However, whenever we get to the other side of this, in 5 years, we are going to have a housing situation that has never been worse. Like the fact that they've just stopped digging and constructing single family homes, I don't know if we'll see prior 2022 highs again, but that will absolutely put a floor under housing. And what is going to drive price appreciation? Well, if they drop interest rates again to 2%, which I don't think they're going to do, that would be insane. If you get wage growth, right, people can qualify for bigger mortgages. That helps. Those are kind of the two inputs that really matter the most. So maybe over that time, you might see a bit of wage growth, and you might just see the whole thing kind of plateau.
Yeah, I've kind of modeled that. I was just assuming we'd stagnate, plateau for most things, and then single family. Of course, I'm open to that. That could just go down. It's always the question of like the variables. Like none of us knew for sure that they were going to cap immigration, right? They might have just kept it going. Yeah. So now that's new information. So all these people like trying to predict, and people would ask me, "What do you think is going to happen?" Well, I'm like, "Well, it depends on many things." But when you got crazy people at the helm making decisions, like you can't necessarily predict what they're going to do.
No, and when the information changes, you have to change your thesis. That's just how life goes. So,
and it sure has changed. So, So for you, you're still going to stick to London, though. Is there still a play outside of your portfolio, like to add new units into your portfolio?
Yeah, or
are you?
Yeah, I mean,
if you get the buy right, it doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter if values are going to come down. If you buy at 200 grand under value, you're laughing.
Well, even if you buy at market, I've learned in the last 2 years, it doesn't matter.
But you can engineer the profit into the deal.
Well, what ends up happening is, we're talking about London here where, you're paying between 120 to 160 a bed. That's kind of market right now. That's how I look at it. And for people that understand that, you could have a 5-bed student rental. That's how valuation for student rentals work. It's how much money are you going to pay per tenant. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, if it's 150 times 5, what is that, like 750? Something like that.
Okay.
Right? So if you talk to someone in Toronto who likes real estate, who thinks we're going to have inflation and they want to have an inflation hedge, there's a whole cohort of people up here that are happy to buy that product. I've learned that. Okay.
Oh, the Toronto people buying London product?
Oh, they don't mind it at all.
I had a business built around that.
Well, that's a good business. Like, maybe where Jessica and I might go in the future someday is building that type of product. Like our mutual friend, he is extremely good at that.
Yeah.
He finds way to add value. He adds bedrooms, right? He adds high-end fixtures and amenities.
Yep.
And the type of student that's going to go to Western University, and I think this is actually going to get worse going forward, is really the 1% club.
Yeah.
Okay.
They come from super wealthy families.
Oh my God.
Like not all of them, but there's a huge segment that do.
Just like it's Gucci money.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know. Like it's ridiculous. Like
I like renting to them.
Well, we do too. I mean, they pay the rent. Okay.
Yeah, their parents pay the rent.
Their parents pay the rent, but then you got to deal with the parents. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge.
They can be too. I didn't have too hard of a time. I had a harder time with parents of. It was when they weren't the well-to-do student class. Like,
okay.
If I had worse units, I would have a worse time dealing with the parents. The better my units, the parents were happier.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure. I imagine the parents are happier.
Hey, look, we got these egress windows. Smoke detectors are brand new, updated. They love that stuff.
Looks safe. Yeah.
Looks safe. New windows.
You got marble countertops and this is just like home, honey.
Exactly. They just want their kids to be happy.
Yeah, well, I get that. But at the same time, these are highfalutin people, man. Like we have investment bankers, we have ophthalmologists, we have lawyers, and I call them pointer people because, they're used to pointing at people and say, hey, you do this. And, if you have an issue in the building, the Supreme Court Justice of Canada is going to sue you or something. That's this is where we're going. And part of this problem with real estate, because now it's been financialized, it's this commodity that's desirable. There's this tension now between tenants and landlords that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
So by nature, it's negative in some ways, and there is a conflict there. Like we always try to manage it, and we're good people. We're not out to get anybody.
You don't have that problem with students, though.
Sometimes you do.
The students are giving you that trouble too.
Yeah. So
I never had that problem.
I can give you a story right now about a situation we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So we had a group of 6 come into one of our houses, and do a different one. Well. I want to tell them the mold one. I can do the mold one. That's a good one. Okay. I mean, we got a list here, man, right? Like we got lots of experience. So, okay. So the mold one, what happened here? Okay. So this is in the middle of the pandemic. All right. That area code, south of Western, where all the students live, like COVID is ripping. It's like 50% infection rate. Everywhere else it was like 1 or something. Like it was in the papers. It was terrible.
Okay.
So everyone's got COVID. Everyone's having respiratory problems. And this lady who is, she's part of a financial investment firm located in Boston, Massachusetts on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And she's like an executive. Okay. So Gucci money. Yeah. So her daughter is in one of our buildings, and she is convinced that she has been subjected to mold poisoning.
Oh, I had one of those.
And, well, we are in the middle of a respiratory-based pandemic. That might have something to do with it. It is ripping in the community. But you know what? We'll go in and we'll take a look. So like my wife and I, we go in, we look over every square inch of the whole building. And like this is a building we've known very well and torn apart and rebuilt, like right down to the studs. Right? We know this building well. Water is not a problem.
Yeah.
And there's not 1 square inch of mold. And this lady is up and down our back. Like, you need to remediate this. You need to spend thousands of dollars to fix this problem.
I've sent in an air test to satisfy somebody who is.
But here's the thing. Here's something I learned, okay? Mold spores are ubiquitous. They are in this room right now with us.
Yeah.
It's just part of the natural flora.
There's a control level, right? That there's this would be a normal rate. They probably test outside or something and compare it. Well, and see if it's elevated.
If you look at the Ministry of Health of Canada, they actually suggest that you don't even bother testing because you're going to find it. And it's all online. You can Google this. If you're a landlord, you want to learn about this, just Google it.
Okay.
So what we tried to do to just appease this woman was bring in the Ministry of Health. I would never want to do this because as soon as you're kind of asking for trouble. If you ask city officials come in and take over your building,
sure.
But just to give this lady peace of mind and get off our back. And she was like a dog with a bone, a group mate. It was bad. So I said,
did you consider just allowing her to replace her daughter and have somebody else come in?
We tried it. And we also said, you know what? If you don't like it here, go find another place to live. See ya. We'll just re-rent it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't do it. She wanted remediation. So what we did is I called the London Middlesex Health Unit. And I said, will you please come into this building and give this woman assurance that we do not have a mold problem? And they said, well, how big is your mold an infestation? I said, well, there's no mold anywhere in the building. I can't see it. She's like, well, we will only come into the building if you can show me a 1 meter square surface. 1 meter squared.
That has mold?
That much.
Yeah.
And they won't even come out for less.
Yeah.
And I went, what am I going to do? So I just compiled this information. I wrote this email. I said, if you don't like it, pounds, salt, get out of here. I'm done. I'm not doing any more work on this. You can leave. And it's funny. I like to ride my bike when I'm going to and from work. One day I'm riding my bike. I'm going home. And I see this, I'm passing the building. I see this, sick Ford Mustang, Cobra. This. I was like, wow, that's a nice ride. It's parked in the driveway. It's I got to see what's going on here. So I pull over my bike, and then next to it is this home inspection car. I'm I know what's going on here. So I go in and I chat out the inspector. I was like, dude, we tore these walls apart twice. You can see for yourself we have no water penetration anywhere in the building. The foundation's mint, spray foam, whatever. And he's like, well, I guess we'll see. And I was like, well, you go ahead and see. And I just left and closed the door because I was so ultra confident. And I was actually glad he was there. Did I ever hear from her again?
No.
So it's you just get these people that.
Yeah. Occasionally.
They're so high maintenance. So that is the downside of students.
I've maybe had.
Yeah. At all times, there's 1 or 2. Yes. That's right.
Before I renovated Sunset, I had all kinds of problems just like that. Parents demanding things, wanted a mold test. Sure enough, we get a mold test in. As soon as I dealt with the renovated product, you saw what I did, floors and all that.
That's a nice place.
As soon as I deal with that, those problems, not a thing. Maybe I got lucky. Very possible.
Yeah, I also think, honestly, it's changed just in that short amount of time.
Yeah, true.
Think about what were the rents you had at Sunset there? 800?
860.
Yeah. So 1,500. It's almost doubled.
Yeah.
Even rich people are pissed off paying these prices because,
true. The sentiment's going to change.
This is why, this is part of this inflation problem, right?
So even my favorite asset class to manage is not as good as it once was.
It's not as good as it once was. It takes more work, and but we do it.
You just set up your systems, you deal with it. Maybe get a VA that you train on how to interact with the parents.
Or you just marry the best property manager in the city. There you go. That's how you solve all your property management problems. That was my solution.
There you go.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep.
So we burned through our time here really quick. Is there stuff you wanted to cover? Anything you wanted to bring up that we didn't talk about?
My mind is full of information, Andrew. I could probably talk your ear off for 4 hours.
Top thing on your mind this week?
and we haven't talked about this, and maybe this is a bit beyond the scope of your podcast. My feeling, and I don't need to get into why, it's going to be globally, it's going to be a challenging time for many people for the next 10 or 20 years. And I think people should really focus on their families, get centered in their business, and have more of a defensive attitude going forward.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Don't stick your neck out too far these days. Make smart, well thought out decisions. That would be mine.
And I think to sum up what you said, a big part of that all ties into don't over leverage yourself.
Totally.
Don't put yourself into high leverage situations or high
like
payment
60%,
situations.
60% LTV, 65%. If the bank will give you 80, just don't take it. like I don't,
Most won't be able to get it.
Well, yeah. I mean, these days that's how it's looking. But
Yeah, valid point. I agree with you. And that's a lot of my thinking changed too. And I'm just like, the normal investment model won't work. Okay, well, I retooled so that we're now just going after it on the buy. We're just trying to make it on the buy. Yeah. One of the other things I'll take is if I can get an American who would like to allow me to take over payments on their 2% mortgage with 27 years left on it, I will gladly do that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great inflation hedge, and I think you'll do well with that.
Yeah, so that's one of the things. And then, just creative strategies. Like it's not that it's the easiest thing to find, but they are out there, and there are people doing those deals. So where do people find you, follow you, reach
Sure,
you?
they can. I'm still semi-hiding, I guess. I came out of hiding maybe 2 years ago. If they really want to follow my thoughts or what I'm sharing, they can my Instagram. It's just my name, Brandon, BRANDON.D.54.
Okay. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. I like when your stories come up. Lots of good talking points.
Yeah.
And
thanks,
interesting stuff.
Yeah, we'll be finding value.
Yeah, definitely. So guys, make sure you go follow that. We'll make sure that is in the show notes. And yeah, great chat as always, man. And we'll have to have you back often. You just let me know when you're going to be in the area.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. It's fun.
All right.
Okay.